I'm John Caltagirone, responsible for the Quinlan Business School Leadership Hub, which is made up of 7 centers, as well as a couple of student groups. And we are interdisciplinary, going across schools within Loyola University. Today's event is being hosted by the Center for Risk Management Advisory Board. And this is an event 2 of 3 in the series that we put together. And I want to pause just for a moment because of something I listened to last night from 2 historians. And what they were saying is we are living in history and we are reaching the part that people write about. And what they meant by that is after something happens, whether it's depression, an earthquake, 9/11, or what happened 2 weeks ago today, the historians will write something. And what they're saying is we have an opportunity to help with the ending of that story. And I want us to be thinking about that as we get involved with the discussion today, because as everybody knows, risk goes across everything. So with that said, I want to thank the Center's Advisory Board, our panelists, and a special shout out to Valerie Nielsen and Antonio Castillo, who arranged this 3-part series. I also want to thank 2 staff people, Harry Haney, the director of the Supply Chain and Sustainability Center, and Peyton Corner, who heads up our Loyola Limited student worker engagements. Without further delay, because we all know what's happening at noon Eastern time on this day, I want to introduce our moderator, Antonio Castillo.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to this historical day in our history. And welcome to On Point with Risk, a new webinar series presented, as John indicated, by the Loyola's Business Leadership Hub and the Center for Risk Management. Each month, this new webinar series will address a new topic within the arena of risk management. Our guests will include knowledgeable experts from various industries, including manufacturing, supply chain, entertainment, entrepreneurial, finance, insurance, medical, and many others. I'm Antonio Castillo, your host and moderator for today's program. What constitutes a risk and what needs to be done to manage risk before a catastrophe happens? Our business world is defined and is unpredictable. That's what makes it such a magnet for attracting the best, the bold, the brazen, the innovators, the entrepreneurs, all that come in with a call to succeed. Efforts to forecast the future are often followed because the path is determined by financial agendas and the interests of the organization. Just because something is complex doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. We simply need to understand the environment that we are in, the direction we must take, and the best practices that we must prepare for when we want to succeed. A solid risk management plan will help us and your organization establish and launch procedures to deal with potential threats, minimize exposure and impact, and effectively deal with the response. So for the next hour, our guest leaders will share their experiences and knowledge and understanding of what is risk and the need to see all aspects of what risk is and how, if not addressed, it can create landmines. A few housekeeping points. Feel free to send in any additional questions you may have because we have allotted 20 minutes for questions at 40. At the end of our webinar, John will share with you how the key takeaways were from today's session. You'll be able to get those by email later. With that, let me extend a gracious welcome, as John has done, on behalf of the Center for Risk Management to our 3 panelists. Our guests today are Chris Allerson, Vice President, Enterprise Risk at Manpower, Inc., Yulia Gurman, Executive Director of Internal Audit and Corporate Security at Packaging Corporation of America, Dr. Abul Javelad, Faculty Professor at Quinlan School of Business, Loyola University of Chicago. Thank you and welcome to today, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. So let's begin with our first question. What should be done in today's business world by companies of all sizes to understand and manage risk?
Would you like me to just to start the conversation and then?
Yes, Dr. Yavalad.
Sure.
That'd be great. Thank you so
Sure.
much.
But first, thank you for inviting me. I think that risk management, enterprise risk management per se, not just financial risk management, started coming into the arena about a decade or maybe a decade and a half ago, and particularly after the financial crisis. Essentially, enterprise risk management is a very interesting strategic tool to identify the threats and opportunities that various companies, whether public or for-profit or non-profit, are facing. And in that sense, if you think about what is the key ingredient in successfully managing an organization, is to identify what are your threats and trying to find ways to mitigate them, and also identify what are your opportunities and allocate resources to do so. Beyond that sort of a conceptual definition, risk management also is a value proposal. There are several studies that they have shown the relationship between mature enterprise risk management and their impact on the basically market value of the corporations. Beyond that, it is also a compliance issue. If you look at, for example, the Dodd-Frank Act that requires companies to have a risk committee, a standalone risk committee of the board. And also there are some of the rating agencies such as Moody's and Standard & Poor's, they now score companies on the basis of their enterprise risk management. And low scores means low ratings, and low ratings means essentially higher cost of capital for companies. So that is kind of a reason for companies to engage in an activity like that.
Right, thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I guess from my career, I've been in a number of industries, some very heavily regulated, including aerospace and chemicals and healthcare. And I think enterprise risk management, you know, I always talk about the framework in a company. It's sort of a one size fits one. I've not worked for a financial services organization, so I don't have that perspective, but risk management folks in that space know what the rigors are around that, you know, that framework. Mm-hmm. My current role today is I was hired to sort of build an ERM framework at Manpower Group. And we are going, the pandemic kind of threw a wrench in our 2020 plans. So we had to kind of rethink, you know, how we were going to go about, you know, doing the risk assessment process, the risk mitigation, identifying the mitigation actions, and then improving our overall governance. We made some strides, but certainly not the plans that we had in mind. For 2021, we're sort of reestablishing a baseline. And I think everyone knows it starts with governance, an operating model, building accountability at the leader level, and then having that, establishing that good tone at the top.
Good. Julia?
Great comment so far. I would add from my standpoint, again, my profession has focused on internal auditing for many years. And what we have seen is sometimes you have that type of siloed approach to risk management. So whether it's a specific geographic location or different functions, that's really focusing on what risk means to that specific function or area, right? So to be successful, you really need to kind of step it up and really have a broad understanding of your risks as an organization again, and really try to avoid those silos. I think that would be one takeaway, I would say, in terms of how you should think about the approach.
So we all agree that something should be done. Let me ask this. Will a company take advantage of risk financing if risk prevention cost is high? I mean, will they do that? Will they go in that direction?
I think the answer is it that nobody likes. I would say it depends, right? It depends on mm-hmm. specific situation where the company is at, what kind of issues they're potentially facing externally, right? The reputational risks and what may come with that, right? So it's a lot of nuggets that are not just internally facing, but also external that you have to consider. And I think in some cases, the decision could be, yes, we have to do it. And as many mentioned, the compliance risk, sometimes you have no choice. You have to invest and make sure you have regulatory compliance. Otherwise, you're not going to be in business much longer. Versus operational and other risks that you're taking, that has a little bit more wiggle room to decide. But again, having that comprehensive view of risk is really what you need to have to make that decision successful, hopefully.
So it seems like it's that slippery slope where we have to say, we really have to do this, but what is it going to cost us? But what are the risks if we don't do it, right?
Actually, Antonio, I was directly involved in this question. I was advising a holding company, a global holding company, and this question came actually into consideration. And the question was that, what is the range? Because if the cost of managing your risk is about somewhere between 10 to 25% above the benefits that you can get, that is the threshold that several companies that I have been dealing with, they consider that at that point, either they have to ignore the risk and take it, or essentially eliminate their operations in that arena. And one example of that is the Canadian banks. The Canadian banking system is quite different from US. In Canada, you have only 6 banks. In US, you have upward of 10,000 banks. And what they did prior to the financial crisis, they decided that they do not want to have a real presence in international lending. So what happened was that they were not affected by the financial crisis from that source of risk. But then later on, when the economy picked up, they also lost opportunities.
Chris, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I think that's, as I've talked to leaders at Manpower Group, I've tried to position the risk assessment as a risk and opportunity assessment, because I think this company has come from a pretty conservative position as far as, what industries we will staff in, and, what types of skills we will staff. And I've tried to ask the question, are we not taking the right amount? Are we not taking sufficient risk? And if we want to take those risks, is there sufficient reward and margin when we talk to those clients? So, this is, and Manpower Group is a very decentralized company. So when you have one conversation with a commercial leader, you need to kind of replicate that across 17 of our largest countries. So it can be, we have to think about, at least at my company, how do we build in risk management thinking within our leadership?
Well, Chris, you bring up a great question for me then, and that is, how is it that, let's say, Manpower or other organizations define risk management? Because if you are decentralized, it could be defined in many different ways, and yet there has to be a kind of a centralized definition. How do you guys get to that point where you define what risk management is?
Well, another thing, when I talk to leaders, I say, I'm building an enterprise risk management framework, and it's about documentation, and it's about accountability. You've come from a place of having a risk management framework, but it was ad hoc. It was not consistent across the countries. And when our CFO stood in front of the audit committee or the board, he didn't have anything to support, what his message to that level was. And some of this is about documenting existing processes that have been informal in the past, and thinking, I think Yulia said it is, thinking more holistically across, don't think small when you're doing risk assessment. You have to go wide.
Dr. Javalat, how do you consult with organizations and have them define risk management?
Well, in general, I think that as some of the other speakers mentioned, when you are hired by a company to advise them about risk management, the first thing that you notice is that there's a reluctance about just that going through a process which is so complex, and also it is very costly. And the other thing is that senior executives of organizations, they believe that they already know all the risk and they're already doing a very good job. So you're faced with that situation entering the process. So I think the conversation starts by first getting an idea about assessing their existing risk management system and trying to highlight whether they have a good system, whether they have a good control, and particularly asking them where they see the value proposal. As some of the speakers, I think Chris mentioned, that do they see that what they have in terms of control has impacted their profitability, or just that has made them not violate the compliance measures, and or whether it has reduced the cost of capital, the debt ratings, for example, are better. And the second question is that to basically show them that it is also a legal imperative for companies to consider some of those things, and also bring some best cases, both in terms of failures as well as in terms of successes. During the financial crisis, many of the venerable companies that went under, they actually had ERM. But the fact of the matter is that there was no culture for risk management within those companies. And it is interesting to note that some companies use ERM as a speculative decision-making. So they basically assess the profitability of the risk management center in terms of how much speculations they are making, how much risk they're making, and whether they are actually generating the profit associated with that. So it's a compilation of all those issues that brings the conversation into the fore.
Thank you. Since Dr. Will has talked to us about speculation, what are some of the external benchmarks that would be beneficial to a company's risk management strategy or their framework? What would you say those are?
Yeah, I can probably name a few. And again, for me, speaking from a bit of internal audit spin, right, it's just kind of Julia's view of how I would use external resources and experience. So I think, first of all, the industry itself, right? So whichever industry you're in, there's a lot of different publications you can always read and really just kind of get a better feel on what's happening. As simple as reading other companies' 10Ks if they're publicly traded, there's always risk factors. So just kind of, especially if you're newer to the industry, it really helps to kind of get a general understanding of what the key risks are. But then if you think about risk is always evolving, right? Take the 2020. Did we ever think this would happen, right? I did not foresee that myself, right? The pandemic, and this was certainly not something that we had top of our list on the risks. But there are publications, there's, for example, Institute of Internal Auditors publishes on risk. So it basically compiles top risks for from the view of the board, from the view of the chief audit executive, chief financial officer. So you can read that and really understand what's top of mind. So this is one of the examples, but there is a lot more that you can find, and I know NACD just recently published a governance piece that also touches on some key risks that are helpful to understand and really be current. And I think then what I find helpful from my role is really translating the risks that I'm hearing right into your company's culture environment, and really being able to, I think the key is to not blow things out of the proportion, right? If you hear risk, does it really apply to your organization in the same magnitude that it may apply to somebody in a different industry? And to the same extent, maybe something is not being given enough attention in the organization. So you also can escalate certain risks and provide some additional data points to your management and the board to help them understand the importance, or maybe why we need to spend a little bit more time addressing and considering investing more in certain risk coverage.
You mentioned two words that resonated with me with what you were saying: new and conversations. I had to write them down so I could remember. So with that in mind, what are some examples of conversations that need to take place or that have taken place in your organizations, or that you have consulted with organizations to gain risk management alignment? What are some of those?
I think it's really proactively reaching out to different disciplines. So in my role, I have corporate security, for example, right, in addition to internal audit. And we also have a separate function for safety. We have a lot of manufacturing facilities. So some of the roles may overlap in corporate security and safety. So we just really talk to each other constantly, making sure that we understand the risks and the coverage, that we avoid duplication of the same effort, but also do not step on each other's toes, because that's probably the least favorite thing you can do to people, is to send conflicting messages as to how to address risk, right, or how to handle a certain situation. So it's really a lot of informal dialogue, believe it or not, right? It's just really building relationships so people are comfortable sharing what's happening in their world, so that you can provide the advice, but you can also work on a common strategy to address risks, right, and make sure you have that coverage.
Right. Chris, you're in, I believe you said 18 countries. So therefore culture comes into play. How do you address this issue of communicating what needs to be done?
Well, in some of our countries, obviously, communication does become more of a challenge. I know my first conversation with the folks in Japan, we had a translator, which was necessary. And I think all of the major functions, sort of the second line functions, have some challenges with not just Japan, but also France, and then some of our Eastern European countries. So I think what we've had to invest in is, or what we'll need to invest in, is some translation, because some of how you move hearts and minds is, just as simple as a newsletter. This is what's going on in risk management. This is sort of, your obligation as a country manager. And then the other thing that we're doing is, and I would say that our leadership at the country and the regional levels are all conversant in English, by and large, with the exception of a couple. But just making sure that you always have those open lines of communication. And I had 3 calls yesterday to talk about where we're going in 2021. And the thing that I wanted to emphasize was, this is a journey. We're not going to get it perfect in the first 2 steps. We're on the first 2 steps of 10. And, corporate ERM is here to support you. And we definitely don't want it to be a check the box activity. This has to feel like it's driving value, not just for us in, communicating to senior leadership and the board, but also for you and the country and the regions.
So based on what you're saying, I'm taking, this is my takeaway, is that not all countries are going to see risk in the same way, but it is important that everybody basically understand what the premise is and what the goal is, and then through communication, whether it's a newsletter or something else, be able to talk about that so that everybody can be on board on the same page. Because sometimes I'm going to guess that certain countries are going to be off on their own thing because they see risk not as prevalent as somebody else.
Yeah, and I think that's important. Just to, I guess, an additional comment is, we want to make sure that we have good metrics in place, and good accountability at the right levels. Because when the financial director in Asia Pacific yesterday said, well, who's going to be responsible for this? And I said, you're going to help with, pulling together the logistics, and we're going to work together, but the accountability lies with the country leaders and the regional leadership. And they, so we're working on some performance management metrics on that front. I'm working with our HR folks.
Perfect. And that segues into my next question. And I will go to Dr. Javalad. What do you use to measure the maturity of a risk management program? What are some of the good things that can be done?
Well, there are actually several factors. One organization that has done a very good job in identifying 7 maturity attributes, and that is called Risk and Insurance Management Society. It's called RIMS, R-I-M-S. And that is a very wonderful source for people that they're doing risk management to go there. They see best cases, they see metrics in terms of measuring various components of the maturity of the organization. And several studies have used those maturity basically structures in order to see that what's the relationship between the maturity of a risk management system within an organization and its performance, judged, just along various metrics. So when you talk about maturity, you want to focus on several factors. You want to focus on the strengths of the risk culture. You want to focus on the basically the risk appetite of the organization. You want to focus on the risk organization, whether there's a chief risk officer, whether there's a committee a sort of standalone risk committee within the organization. What is the governance of risk? And then you need to score them. The problem with measuring maturity is that it is not publicly available information that you can use to measure maturity. You have to bring the information from the organization and then try to rank it, try to measure it within the various attributes for maturity. And the problem is, most of the time, those informations are either obtained by interviews or by doing questionnaires. And then the additional problem is that you have to decide which one of those questions are actually conveying the appropriate information. And there are some new statistical techniques that actually it tells you what is the reliability of the questions and the information that you get. And then on that way, you can score the maturity of the company. And at RIMS, you can actually see that maturity rankings by various industries, which I found it to be very useful for companies that they want to start developing a risk management system.
Wonderful. Yulia?
Yeah, I think for us, again, I think it comes down to really understanding each function responsible for certain risks and then establishing certain criteria, right? You know, if you think about, let's take cybersecurity risks, right? You know, there are certain indicators you can use, right? You know, did we have any incidents, right? And what was the response? So you can track that type of information. You know, if you think about safety at our manufacturing facilities, there's also a host of different metrics that is being tracked and reported on periodically. So again, I think it comes down, and again, ARM could get as complex as you want it to be, right? But what you want to avoid is really that routine exercise to check the box, as Chris mentioned, right? Because a lot of times companies would use the, you know, oh, we have ERM. Okay, well, what are you guys doing? Oh, we meet once a year. We just go through the list of 20 risks that we came up with 10 years ago, and we just kind of see if anything moved in a priority, right? So that's probably the worst case scenario you want to have. So it's meaningful metrics by specific discipline, but also it goes back to the culture of the company and how you want to handle that maturity and that metric, right, information. And in some cases, it's not formally tracked. So I would say, don't expect perfection. I mean, I don't know if I know of any company that is perfectly tracking every risk, every metric, and, you know, maturity, right? But it's really coming down to maybe starting from the top, right? Are you meeting your objectives as a company, your strategic objectives, your operating plan, and kind of couple that with what you are getting in terms of the different risk disciplines, and looking for, you know, potential issues, right? If there are some issues that you're seeing in achievement of objectives, you know, are there any indicators and information you're getting that needs to be considered for revision and things like that? So just, you know, just a few examples of it.
You're making my job really easy, because my next question is segueing off of what you just said. So what is the future of risk management? I mean, what are some of the emerging issues that are coming up?
From my perspective in our industry, it's artificial intelligence.
AI.
And the cost of technology and implementing artificial intelligence from so many vendors, so many startups that have something to sell you. And that's what is, you know, on the horizon right now, and how we go about thinking about artificial intelligence. What's our strategy? Because right now I think we have about 10 different strategies. So that can be a challenge too, is getting your arms around, you know, kind of who's doing what in the organization.
Right. So to that point, you know, what are some of the career paths that are coming up? Some of the options, you know, good training opportunities. What should people be looking at to enhance their skill sets?
Well, I guess from my perspective, I'm new into risk management. I led internal audit organizations for 20 plus years, and this was an opportunity for me to go into operations. And there's a world of opportunity in risk management. And going to a couple of conferences,
Mm-hmm.
I tell young people, I go, if you want a potentially very interesting, fruitful career, a lot of those people are not young at those conferences. So there's going to be a lot of people retiring at once. And so when you talk to risk leaders at other companies, they're like, yeah, we don't really see the next generation of risk management leaders. Now, some schools are obviously, doing better than others and how they kind of think about that and educate folks. But it is kind of a small group. There's, companies just don't have teams of ERM professionals. I'm a team of one, and I just hired my first person in the past 2 weeks. So just gives you, some perspective on it's kind of a small function when you think about, as compared to internal audit, at least.
Thank you. Dr. Jathavat,
I think,
what would you say?
I think the area of risk management has grown extremely rapidly, and you can look at almost any business school in the United States or in Europe, around the world. They definitely have a program, a Master of Science in Risk Management, and the enrollment in those programs are also quite good, because it's very easy for a business school to put together the courses, because you have these courses basically in a variety of areas. The question is basically putting them together within the context of a program. There are also some very interesting professional societies, for example, Global Association of Risk Professionals, GARP, that they put conferences, and those conferences create a network for organization. Even CFA right now, in order to pass level 2 or level 3 of CFA, you need to have some reasonable knowledge about ERM. There are actually ERM questions. So when we teach risk management to our students, because we are also promoting them to take the CFA, we make sure that we cover the questions that, for example, CFA is interested, so that they are prepared to actually do so. Lots of professional opportunities, because a risk management department could be very small, as Chris was mentioning, or it could be extremely large. And so they need basically, I think, preparations in areas such as statistics, such as finance, economics, particularly statistics, I would say, because you're gathering information in a variety of ways, and also information technology. So I think there are lots of opportunities for people to find jobs in the area of risk management.
Thank you. Julia?
Yes, I would say that, as we talked about, it's a very broad concept, right? Risk management. And I know there's in chat, there's a discussion going on. I'm probably stealing your moderator at this point, but, questions about ERM, ERM versus, risk framework, right? I think if you're considering a role in risk management, right, there are different ways to think about it. First of all is probably in general, like, is there industry you're interested in, right? Because by different industry, there could be very different types of approach to risk management, right? Again, we talked about the financial industry, very heavily regulated. There's a lot going on there versus, some other industries that may be focused not so much maybe on financial, but, some other risks. So I think exploring a little bit more and understanding what's your passion, right? Perhaps, there is a specific segment of you are interested in. And then second, if you think about it, again, we talked about each company is unique in terms of their approach to risk management, right? It could be, in Chris's case, the ERM program or risk management team organization. In case of my organizations, we don't really have like a one, group, right? So it's really a cross-functional responsibility. So in that case, again, you kind of take a peeling the onion, right? You pick your industry. Now, what are you interested in, right? Is this, compliance, operational, financial, technology? There are so many different lenses you can also pick and kind of get more involved. And I think that would drive kind of and direct you into what exactly you should really maybe focusing on when you're studying in risk management, or any additional disciplines that you would like to understand a little bit more. One other document, if somebody is not aware, is the COSO ARM framework. I would probably, it's easy, to at least read the summary, right? It's a few pages summary. It's available at no charge on ARM website. So you can at least kind of see how they're proposing to think about ARM. Maybe that's going to help you and kind of give you a little bit more nuggets as to how you want to approach your career in risk management as well.
It seems to me that, and we heard this from the three of you earlier today, is that whether it's from a financial standpoint as to that slippery slope that people will do a lot of risk management or not so much risk management, and looking at those benefits. It seems to me that with what we are coming out of, hopefully, this COVID pandemic that we are in, it put a lot of different perspectives out there on risk. I mean, regardless of the industry, whether that's supply chain, logistics, restaurant, entrepreneur, all of them saw something and they all got hit in some way, shape, or form. So it seems to me that they're going to be looking at this in a little different way. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that companies that they were involved and engaged in having the risk management system, having the right conversations, they did far better during the COVID.
Yes, I would agree.
Than companies that did not. And in fact, a company that I have been working with to develop a non-for-profit U.S. educational firm, basically we started developing the risk management system right around 2017. And when the COVID hit, they had enough liquidity and their informational basically system was so well developed so that they could basically handle their operation remotely. They knew the sources of information to basically get more information about the geopolitical nature of the environment that they were dealing with. So I think that COVID has done a lot of help in some sort of a weird way in terms of emphasizing the role of risk management in companies. And one thing which is interesting, we talked about how it is evolving. If you looked at an average survey of risk management risks, external risks basically impacting the global economy, right about December of 2019, one of those risks was the spread of viral diseases. And about 14,000 risk specialists basically ranked it as moderate to low. And you just about 1.5 months later, it became the most important and the most impactful risk that that you could consider. So it is an evolving thing, and I agree with the other speakers that it is not something that you talk about it and you forget about it. It's a dynamic process, and you have to be basically continuously realizing that whether the risks that you rank to be in the top 5, they're still there, whether you are benefiting from managing them or not, and a variety of other areas.
Yeah, thank you so much. It seems like you have to be so creative in understanding what possibly could happen, as opposed to just saying, this is all that can happen. And sometimes we get away from that. Okay, what I'd like to do now is I'd like to turn this over to Valerie. We've got, I'm sure, quite a few questions that have come in since we've been on. So I'm going to turn this over to Valerie to have you guys have those questions, and then I'll be back to you in a little bit.
Thank you so much, Antonio, and hello to everyone on our webinar. We've had a very good engagement on chat. We're very appreciative, and so I'm going to present the questions in which the order they were received. So there's equality. Our first question from our participants is, how do you identify the best risk mitigation levers? So obviously you've done your risk assessment, and then I think for some of the things that you all have talked about, what's that, maybe if there's that 25% benefit, what are then the levers then that kind of help you get there to understand that? Chris, since you're new in chair, how's that conversation gone with your C-suite executives?
Yeah, that's, we haven't, since we're in sort of the building phase, coming from a more informal risk assessment process than internal audit led, I can see that there's been behavior in the past to kind of identify a mitigation action that's actually stronger than it really is. So last year, under the old process, when I started having those conversations with the countries and saying, okay, tell me about what you have documented here and you're telling me, tell me about how this works. Just to try and stress test it a little bit. I think the country management would then concede a little bit that, well, we could probably do a better job with this. And with a more fully documented, kind of risk register that is one of our plans for the year, we'll have, better descriptions, we'll have owners, we'll have mitigation actions that everyone's clear on, how much it does reduce the risk. And then with the residual risk that remains, Is everyone comfortable with that? So I'm talking a little bit forward a little bit and a little aspirational, but that's kind of where we're going here.
Professor, how have you then done this as you've been coaching and guiding your clients on thinking about risk levers?
Well, I think that it depends on the nature of the risk. First of all, it is not something that you can see the effect right away. So many of the mitigation strategies that companies are using, they provide results over time. So it is difficult to just say that whether the mitigation strategy is correct or not. Some mitigation strategies, particularly when you deal with the areas of financial risk and also with the information and security risk, they are much readily providing the results that you can see, and you can make adjustments to that. Some other risk strategies, for example, the risk related to innovation or human resources, they take a longer period for them to evaluate what those mitigations, whether they are working or whether they are not working. At the end of the day, the question is that the success of a mitigation strategy has to have an outcome. And so a key issue in establishing a risk management process and the mitigation strategies is to actually decide how you're going to measure their impacts. Not all of them are going to be impact on stock prices or cost of capital. Some of them could be impact on, for example, the culture of risk management within the company, and they are more difficult to measure, and they only mature as you go through time and you have the ability to review them.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. And Yulia, really from your perspective on a day-to-day basis and leading your internal audit function, you're the one maybe coming behind and auditing maybe some of these outcomes that Professor talked about, as far as once these risk levers are pulled, you're being able to report to management and the audit committee how well the outcomes occurred or didn't.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, walk the talk, right? As we talked about, there is, you can promise a lot of different things, right? Again, we're talking beyond agreeing on what those levers could be, right? We are coming in and from internal audit perspective, to your point, we would look into the execution, right? And governance over those specific strategic risk mitigating procedures. And in some cases, you do see that, it was basically promised, but really nothing happened, right? And then you have to really understand the root cause of what's causing that. Sometimes it could be a valid reason for, for delay. Sometimes it's just really, lack of a better term, sloppiness in execution, right? So the key is to really understand and communicate, what is really happening. So again, being independent in the organization really helps us have that view that we can communicate up, to the audit committees and the board, in both, good news and not so good news as well.
Perfect. Our next question has to do with climate risk. And our participant wants to know, is really climate risk being integrated into ERM or the corporate risk framework? And so as you're thinking about your response, our participant sees that the corporate risk framework speaks more to risk appetite, and then the ERM risk management is the overall kind of wider view of the organization, just so make sure you have kind of the frame of mind that our participant would like you to be in answering the question, as far as are you truly considering climate risk, and as there actually actions on that. So maybe Professor, we'll start with you, with having a variety of clients. I'm sure this is not a new subject.
Actually, climate risk has climbed up into the organizational chart in terms of being a risk that companies have to be concerned about. There is a UN charter on basically strategies and also steps that companies have to take in order to measure, for example, the magnitude of the carbon that they are releasing, their carbon footprint. And actually, there are very solid I would say standards that companies can use in order to measure how they are dealing with their climate risk. So it is becoming actually a compliance issue as we are moving forward, as opposed to just being a measurement of the risk that the company is facing.
Chris, it might be a little early days for you on climate risk.
Well, we don't, one of the things during the course of the risk assessment that the larger countries completed and the regions aggregated, we didn't see it in our top 10 risk. So one of the things that in talking to other companies is what do you do with some of those emerging risks, and how do you get your leadership to think about that? And one of the companies I talked to recently really gave some, I think, some good advice. They said, don't think about climate as just a standalone risk. Think about how climate change is going to impact you as a company. And one of the things that they said was some of the work that the ERM team had done was basically do some long-term analysis that demonstrated that some of their manufacturing plants are either going to be in a drought area or are going to be underwater in the next 10 to 15 years. So those are the kind of eye-opening work that I'd like to do at some point to get this company thinking about the impact of climate on our regulatory requirements by countries, because we're in so many countries. And then also, how does the climate going to impact talent? Because that's basically what we do, is we recruit talent for our clients. And then we try to be thought leaders. What are we thinking about as far as the surveys that we do, and then turn back around and give it to our clients. So a lot more to come, Valerie.
Yeah, no, and it doesn't mean, as we've said, it's all the answers. It's climate risk isn't just about recycling. It's much bigger, and that's exactly what you're saying now, Yulia. You're in an organization that has packaging and materials, so you actually probably have some more tactile type things when it comes to climate risk. Including some of the things that has already been said.
Yeah, and I think everybody else said it. It's obviously something that everybody should be thinking about, to be honest. And from our standpoint, we're thinking about sustainability, right? That's obviously a big initiative and a big drive. So we actually do have even issue separate reports on the sustainability and kind of what the company does and what's happening. So it's definitely close to us, and it's something that's being discussed up the chain, including the board as well.
Perfect.
Valerie, if I may add something on that.
Sure, of course.
There is, I mentioned that there is a report. Actually, the title of that report, because you can just get it from the internet, is Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. Now, the issue that I think it is going to happen, perhaps, just that in the next couple of years, would be that as part of the audit that the company will go through, the company has to disclose essentially the extent of its climate risk and what it does in order to deal with that. Just the same way that when a company goes through an audit, if there is prospect of fraud, for example, which the Audit and Finance Committee will deal with, you have to essentially indicate that whether there is fraud and what you are doing in terms of dealing with it and removing it. So the main issue with respect to climate risk is disclosure. And at the present time, there is very little disclosure. Every company, particularly those that they are logistically, just spread out around the world, they are obviously affected by climate risk. And one other issue that it's important is that the role of valuation in a company. When we evaluate a project, whatever project it may be, we use some conventional techniques to do it. So these other risks, such as climate risk, innovation risk, they have a separate impact on your valuation. So if you don't consider it, probably you are not choosing the right projects.
No, absolutely. And what we'll do is in our takeaways, because there's some websites that we can share as far as on the accounting side, FASB, because they are talking about these disclosures, as professors just said, and also with the UN, and then the SEC is also has discussions. So we can give you some maybe links to where you can learn more about them. So let me move now to our next question, which is from our Q&A. The question is for all of you, as mentioned before, before ERM was formalized as a discipline in the last decade or so, good managers were already taking risks into account in making business decisions. is there a size or complexity of the business at which a formal risk management process adds value, and or all organizations, regardless of size and complexity, take advantage of a formal risk management practice? Maybe we'll kind of do a little reverse order. Yulia, what is your take on something like that?
I think it really comes down to the culture of your organization, regardless of the size of the organization. It could be a huge organization that has low appetite for a lot of formal processes. I would say probably with a caveat, if you're very large and very complex and multi-locations, you probably almost have to have some sort of formality, right? So that's probably where you advocate for more structure versus, maybe a smaller size company, domestic or less operations. You have to really understand how the company operates. Is there appetite for a very formal program, or are you okay with some sort of a kind of understanding in general what's happening, right? I think it's always a fine balance, between over formalizing something and then not being practical versus not having enough at all so that you actually have no idea what's happening across the organization. So again, I think the answer is there's no one magic recipe for the ARM program, right? You can call it ARM and it could be all sorts of different things. It's from my experience, from what I've learned from my colleagues as well, is that there's really no perfect solution for anybody. So you just really need to learn the company, the culture, and really understand what's needed to be successful in that role or in that program.
Professor, what's maybe kind of the view from the academic side?
I think as previous speaker mentioned, size and the complexity of the organization has been shown by various surveys and various studies that have a positive impact in terms of having a full-blown risk management system. It is an expensive process, and it is also quite difficult to establish its value proposal. So when you combine these two within an organization that they have to manage on the margin in order to survive, so it is not the first thing that an organization considers to do. But the size of the organization, whether they are internationally involved, obviously is hugely important. And also it is the talent that the organization has. You need to have specific talents. It is very interesting to most people when they talk about chief risk officer, they think that these guys are all basically PhDs in economics or PhDs in finance. That's not true. In fact, just that they're coming from a much wider, just that areas of, I have seen chief risk officers that they have had their education in physics and sociology, just that in political science. So I think that you also need to have at least a nucleus of people that they think this is something important and they can articulate it for the board.
Yeah, makes sense. Chris?
Yeah, I would agree with, all those comments. Being new into my organization and new to the formalizing ERM, I knew that staffing, I'm coming from a healthcare company. So, an ERM program in staffing is going to look different than it looked in healthcare, which was, the consequences for failure there are you hand out the wrong drugs and people can die. So here it's people still can get, injured and die if they're put in, dangerous situations at clients, but it's really a different, it's a different risk, type. And that's what I keep talking to leaders about, is making sure that this works for the company and people are on board. And I know in some conversations, I won't name countries, but it's in Eastern Europe. And those guys just were like, well, tell me what to do. Just tell me what to do. And I'm like, this exercise, it's not like that. You don't just fill out a spreadsheet and send it back to me. This is about you guys managing your risks and that you understand, the business case for this, the value of it. And, I'm kind of trying to move hearts and minds here. And the last thing I want is just a set of Excel documents sitting in my inbox one day.
Well, no, for you, it makes me think of one of the first things you said as we kicked off today about it's one size fits one. And I think that's what you're all saying, and that there's factors to consider, but it is a unique fit for every company.
Yep.
Our last question that we have is probably good to maybe end on is, if you could describe an anecdotal example of a risk identified and analyzed to be worthy of an aversion action that then yielded favorable business results credible to stakeholders. Anyone want to volunteer to go first?
One anecdote that I have, it may not exactly deal with that. It goes back to these cultural differences between countries. I recall a couple of years ago, I was invited by a holding company in the Middle East to basically start the conversation for risk management. So being educated in the United States, risk is something that, we want to avoid, we want to mitigate. And I wasn't aware that in the culture of the country, they were pretty much, just risk seekers. So when I started talking about avoiding risk, they started looking at me in a very strange way because they said, why do you want us to avoid these risks? We have been taking them. That is how, we make money. And that's how, just that we move our organizations forward. In terms of perhaps the most effective example that I have in the area of risk management is dealing with cybersecurity risk. That companies that they have been able to streamline their basically informational security. Particularly, there are companies that they have 20 different emails, and the possibility of just that somebody taking advantage of that and is huge. So when they can streamline it. And the other thing that I notice is that when we talk about cybersecurity risk, we think that we are talking about somebody basically a theft of information. But a good cybersecurity risk management also provides appropriate financial information. And those financial information are extremely valuable in moving the financial objectives of the company.
Well, we've run out of time. This has been extremely engaging. I've learned a lot, so I'm going to turn things back over to Antonio to take us out with wrap up from John.
Great. Thank you so much, Valerie. And again, thank you, everybody. I mean, every business and organization must know that they have to encounter risk in an unexpected way, and that if you don't address it, as we've heard today, it's going to cost you in one way or another. Having a well thought out plan to mitigate risk is going to prevent organizations from having those unexpected things happening. And by minimizing risks and by reducing the landmines that you're going to face, you're going to be better off doing that. Before I turn it over to John, I just want to let you know, thank you again to all three of you for being with us today. Next month, our webinar will be on February 24th. And will be moderated by my dear friend and colleague, Chicago's own WBBM radio political editor, Craig Dellamore. Our guests on the panel next week will be Kimberly White, Global Compliance Officer at Ingredion, and Gabrielle Cartieres, who is the Screen Actor Guild AFTRA President. So I look forward to that as well. With that in mind, I'm now going to turn it over to John.
Thank you very much. And another thank you to the panelists, the moderator, the staff, as well as all of you who have taken the time to attend this. And I have a saying, and I'm hopeful that each one of the attendees has taken away at least one golden nugget for today. You will receive, whoever attended will receive the key takeaways. We'll send that out individually to each one of you. And if you would like to learn more or get involved with the Center for Risk Management or any of the Business Leadership Hub Centers, feel free to let us know that. And enjoy the rest of the day. Be safe, be well, and hopefully we'll see you next month too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.